That night, Georgia lay in bed replaying the day. The laughter over ice cream, the quiet confessions, the touch on her arm. She knew she should be cautious. Abby was her lawyer, her anchor, her friend. And yet, she pressed a hand to her lips, as though holding back a secret smile. For the first time, the thought of tomorrow didn't feel heavy. It felt full of possibility. The apartment was too quiet. Georgia sat curled on the couch, her knees drawn to her chest, staring at the dim glow of the television. The movie playing had blurred into nonsense, just voices she wasn't really hearing. Her chest ached in that hollow way it did at night, when the distractions faded and she was left alone with herself. She had told herself she was fine, that she was stronger now, that she was rebuilding. But tonight, the silence pressed too hard. It reminded her of all the nights her ex-husband had come home late, or not at all. Of all the times she had convinced herself love was supposed to feel like waiting. Her phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark. She stared at it for a long time before she finally reached for it. Her fingers hovered, hesitating. It's stupid. She's probably busy. It's late. But before she could talk herself out of it, she pressed Abby's number. The phone rang once. Twice. And then, Georgia. Abby's voice, warm even through static. Is everything all right? The sound of it broke something inside her. Georgia swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called. You don't have to apologize, Abby said firmly. What's wrong? The question was so simple, so steady, that the truth tumbled out. I feel so alone tonight. And I didn't know who else to call. There was silence for a beat. Then Abby's voice softened. Stay put. I'm coming over. George's eyes widened. Abby, you don't have to. I want to. And then the line went dead. 20 minutes later, a knock at the door. Georgia rushed to open it, her heart pounding. Abby stood there, a little breathless from the climb, her hair loose from the wind. She wore jeans and a dark sweater instead of her usual tailored armor, and somehow that made her even more disarming. I brought tea, Abby said, holding up a small bag from the corner cafe. Chamomile. Figured you didn't need coffee this late. George's throat tightened. You didn't have to. I wanted to, Abby repeated, stepping inside. They settled on the couch, mugs in hand, steam curling in the quiet room. For a while, Georgia didn't speak. She just stared into the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Abby didn't push. She simply sat beside her, close but not overwhelming, her presence steady as an anchor. Finally, Georgia whispered, I thought I'd be okay by now. Stronger. But some nights it feels like I'm falling apart all over again. Abby turned slightly, her gaze gentle. Healing isn't a straight line. Some nights will hurt more. That doesn't mean you've failed. It just means you're human. Tears welled in Georgia's eyes. She blinked quickly, embarrassed. I hate crying in front of people. Then don't think of me as people, Abby said softly. Think of me as someone who sees you. All of you. Even the messy parts. Georgia's breath caught. The words wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and terrifying all at once. She looked at Abby, then really looked. At the lines of care around her eyes, the strength in her jaw, the softness she rarely let others glimpse. Her chest tightened with something she didn't want to name. Some point, Georgia's hand slipped against Abby's on the couch. She meant to pull away, to mumble an apology. But Abby's fingers curled around hers, gently, deliberately, holding. Georgia froze. Their hands rested together, warm, steady. She felt her pulse racing in her wrist, and wondered if Abby could feel it too. Georgia. Abby's voice was low, almost a whisper. Georgia turned toward her, their faces closer than they had ever been. She could see the flecks of gold in Abby's brown eyes, the way her breath caught, as if she was fighting the same pull. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that space between them. Abby leaned in, just slightly, her lips hovering a breath away. Georgia's heart pounded. She wanted it, the kiss, the closeness, but fear tangled in her chest. What if it was too soon? What if she wasn't ready? Abby hesitated, searching her eyes. And then, with quiet strength, she pulled back just enough to break the spell. I don't want to rush you, she said softly, her thumb brushing over Georgia's knuckles. Not when you've already been through so much. Georgia exhaled shakily, both relieved and aching. You're too good to me. Abby's lips curved faintly. Not too good. Just careful. They stayed like that, hands entwined, sipping tea, the almost kiss hanging between them like a secret promise. When Abby finally left, Georgia lingered at the door, her hand pressed to her chest. She had wanted that kiss. She knew Abby had too. But maybe, just maybe, waiting made it all the more precious. The storm had rolled in from the sea that evening, scattering beachgoers and swallowing the horizon with a violet haze. The summer retreat felt quieter, as though the world outside the small coastal town had dimmed its volume just for them. Georgia had been restless all day, a tension she carried in her shoulders, her voice, the way her eyes kept glancing toward Abby as if the girl herself were the thundercloud waiting to break. Abby felt it too, that fragile pull in the air between them, like static. Something unnamed had been gathering since their arrival, brushing against the edges of ordinary conversation and polite distance, daring them to step closer. By dinner, it was unbearable. They had stayed behind while the others wandered into town for drinks, choosing instead the soft light of the retreat's common kitchen. The world beyond the windows was wild with rain, droplets racing down the glass like frantic lovers, and inside the two of them shared a silence that pulsed with heat. Georgia leaned against the counter, wine glass in hand. Abby sat at the table, tracing circles on the wood grain with her fingertip, her mind spinning. It was Georgia who spoke first. You've been quiet tonight. Abby lifted her head. So have you. A smile ghosted across Georgia's lips. She pushed off the counter and crossed the room. Each step was unhurried, deliberate, as though she were moving not through space, but through layers of hesitation. She set her glass down on the table beside Abby, then pulled out the chair opposite and sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain hammered the roof. The kitchen clock ticked like a heartbeat. Abby felt her chest rise and fall too quickly, too shallow. I keep thinking about how strange this is, Georgia finally said, her voice low. How natural it feels to be here with you. And how wrong it should feel at the same time. Abby's throat tightened. Wrong. Georgia's eyes softened. You're my student. I'm supposed to protect boundaries, not blur them. There it was. The unspoken, trembling truth. Abby's pulse quickened, her palms damp against her lap. But you want to blur them, Abby whispered. The words hung in the air like a confession, raw and dangerous. Georgia inhaled sharply, her composure fracturing for just a second. She leaned back in her chair, staring at Abby as though the girl had just lit a match in a dark room. Yes, Georgia admitted at last. God help me, yes. Silence crashed between them, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, a silence filled with every glance they had stolen, every brush of hands, every unspoken longing. Abby moved first. She reached across the table, her fingers trembling as they found Georgia's hand. Warmth exploded at the contact. Georgia closed her eyes briefly, then flipped her palm upward, twining their fingers together as if it had always been inevitable. I've wanted to touch you for weeks, Abby confessed, her voice breaking. Every time you look at me like that, I feel like my skin is on fire. Georgia's hand squeezed hers. She leaned forward, so close their foreheads nearly touched across the narrow table. Abby could see the flecks of gold in her professor's eyes, the tiny scar near her eyebrow, the rise and fall of her breath. You have no idea what you do to me, Georgia whispered, her tone both reverent and desperate. Abby's heart slammed against her ribs. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, Georgia shifted, closing the final inch of space, pressing her mouth to Abby's. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, the careful testing of a boundary long feared. But when Abby exhaled a trembling sigh against Georgia's lips, the restraint shattered. Georgia deepened the kiss, sliding her hand to cradle Abby's jaw, thumb brushing her cheek, as though memorizing every contour. Abby whimpered into her mouth, clutching Georgia's fingers tighter. Heat spread through her body, pooling low and urgent, making her dizzy. The kiss grew hungrier, lips parting, breaths mingling, tongues meeting in hesitant strokes that quickly turned desperate. Georgia broke away with a ragged gasp, forehead pressed against Abby's. "This is madness," she whispered. Abby shook her head, voice shaking.
No.
"This is the only thing that's ever felt real." Something inside Georgia gave way then, years of restraint, rules, the armor of being Professor Harper. They melted beneath Abby's trembling certainty, her youth filled with fire, her honesty like oxygen. Georgia pushed back her chair, rising. Abby followed instinctively, standing so close their bodies nearly touched. Georgia cupped her face with both hands and kissed her again, harder, pouring weeks of aching restraint into that collision of lips and breath and want. Abby clung to her waist, fingers digging into the fabric of her blouse, pulling her closer, needing more. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the only sound that mattered was the wet, urgent press of their mouths, the broken moans escaping between them. Georgia pulled back just enough to speak, her voice husky. "Abby, if we do this, there's no going back." Abby's answer was immediate, her eyes shining with fierce certainty. "I don't want to go back." Her words shattered the last of Georgia's hesitation. She kissed Abby again, hands sliding into her hair, tugging her head back gently to deepen the kiss until Abby moaned against her lips. When their mouths finally parted, they were both breathless, flushed, trembling. Georgia rested her forehead to Abby's again, their breaths sinking, their bodies vibrating with restrained hunger. "Not here," Georgia murmured. "Not like this. You deserve more than a kitchen table." Abby smiled through her ragged breaths. "Then take me somewhere else." They stumbled down the hallway, hands grasping, mouths finding each other in stolen, messy kisses between steps. George's room door clicked shut behind them, the sound like a lock turning on the rest of the world. Abby barely had time to take in the glow of the bedside lamp before Georgia pinned her gently against the wall, kissing her with a hunger that left Abby's knees weak. Their hands roamed, Abby sliding beneath the hem of Georgia's blouse, Georgia cupping the curve of Abby's hip through thin fabric. Abby gasped when Georgia's lips trailed from her mouth to her jaw, then down to her throat, sucking gently until Abby shivered. "God, you're beautiful," Georgia murmured against her skin. "So young, so alive." Abby tilted her head back, offering her neck, trembling under every kiss, every brush of teeth. Her hands tugged Georgia's blouse free, fingers splaying across warm skin. The contact made Georgia groan softly, biting her lip as she pulled back just enough to search Abby's eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked, breathless. "Tell me to stop and I'll stop." Abby answered by pulling her into another kiss, fierce and certain. "Don't stop. Please, Georgia." That plea broke something open in her. Georgia lifted Abby, pressing her against the wall, Abby's legs wrapping instinctively around her waist. Their mouths collided again, messy and desperate, Abby moaning into Georgia's lips as their bodies finally aligned. The heat between them was unbearable now, pressing, pulsing. Georgia carried Abby to the bed, laying her down gently, reverently, as though she were both sacred and burning. She hovered above her, brushing hair from Abby's face, kissing her slowly, deeply, tasting every sigh. When Georgia's hands began to roam over Abby's ribs, her waist, her trembling stomach, Abby arched into the touch, lips parting with a breathless moan. "More," she whispered. "Please." The storm outside reached its crescendo as inside, two women finally gave in to the longing that had been building like thunder for weeks. And for the first time, Georgia let herself forget everything except this. Abby's mouth, Abby's body, Abby's whispered pleas, the space between them finally gone. The storm was still raging outside, but neither of them noticed anymore. Rain rattled the windows, thunder rolled across the sky, and still Abby only felt the heat of Georgia's body above her, the weight of her presence, the softness of her mouth. Georgia kissed her slowly at first, savoring, as if she were memorizing Abby's taste. Every press of lips lingered. Every brush of tongue was deliberate, reverent. Abby clutched at her professor's blouse, fumbling with the buttons, desperate to feel more. Georgia pulled back just enough to watch her. Abby's hair fanned across the pillow, her cheeks flushed, lips swollen, eyes wide and dark with desire. "God, Abby," Georgia whispered, her voice breaking with awe. "You're breathtaking." Abby's chest rose and fell rapidly. "Then don't stop looking at me. Don't stop touching me." The words cut through Georgia's hesitation like lightning. She leaned down, kissing her again, harder this time, guiding Abby's hands as they tugged her blouse free. Fabric fell aside, and Abby gasped softly at the sight of bare skin beneath. Her fingers trembled as she touched Georgia for the first time, the smooth lines of her waist, the curve of her ribs. Georgia shuddered at the contact, closing her eyes briefly, then lowering herself so their bodies pressed together fully. The heat that rushed through Abby nearly undid her. Their kisses grew more urgent. Georgia's hands slid down Abby's sides, tugging at the hem of her thin shirt. She hesitated, eyes flicking to Abby's face. "Can I?" Abby nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "Yes. Please." Georgia lifted the fabric slowly, carefully, revealing inch by inch of soft skin, until Abby lay bare beneath her. Her breath caught, not from shame, but from the intensity in Georgia's gaze. The way she looked at her was almost too much, as if Abby were something holy. "You're perfect," Georgia murmured, running her palm reverently across Abby's stomach, her hip, her trembling thigh. Abby moaned softly at the touch, arching into it, her body aching for more. Georgia bent down, kissing the hollow of her throat, then trailing her mouth lower, along collarbones, across the swell of her chest. Abby's hands tangled in her hair, pulling gently, gasping with every press of lips, every flicker of tongue. When Georgia's mouth closed around her, Abby cried out, the sound breaking in the storm's thunder. Her body arched, legs tightening around Georgia's hips, overwhelmed by sensation. Georgia soothed her with kisses, with murmured words against her skin. "You're safe. I've got you. Just let me love you." Abby's eyes fluttered shut. No one had ever touched her like this, not just hunger, but devotion. Every kiss felt like worship, every caress like a vow. Her hands roamed down Georgia's back, nails dragging lightly, making her moan into Abby's skin. The sound sent shivers through her. She tugged at Georgia's waistband, whispering breathlessly, "I want all of you. Please don't hold back." Georgia pulled up to look at her, her eyes dark with desire but still searching. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Abby said fiercely, her voice raw with need. "I've never been more sure of anything." Something broke open then, the last of Georgia's restraint. She shed the rest of her clothes slowly, deliberately, as if bearing not just her body, but her heart. Abby drank in every inch, eyes wide, lips parted, unable to believe the woman she had dreamt of for so long was here, naked before her, trembling with the same hunger. Georgia lowered herself back down, skin against skin, heat against heat. The contact made them both gasp, their bodies aligning, slick with sweat, feverish. Abby wrapped her arms around her, pulling her closer, their mouths colliding again with a desperation that bordered on madness. They moved together in broken rhythm, kisses, moans, whispered names, until Georgia's hand slid lower, tentative at first, then certain when Abby gasped and arched beneath her. Their bodies found a language all their own, built of touch and breath and the storm's pounding echo. Abby's cries filled the room, muffled against Georgia's shoulder, her hands clutching at her back. Every stroke, every press, unraveled her further. She was shaking, lost, consumed, until release tore through her like lightning splitting the night. She cried out, clutching Georgia as if she were the only anchor in the storm. Georgia held her through it, kissing her temple, whispering her name over and over. Only when Abby's trembling began to fade did Georgia lift her head, eyes glassy with tears she hadn't expected. Abby blinked up at her, dazed and shining. "Georgia, I want to make you feel the same." The older woman smiled faintly, brushing Abby's cheek. You already have. But Abby shook her head, determination lighting her eyes. She guided Georgia gently onto her back, kissing her neck, her chest, her stomach, exploring every inch with reverence. Georgia moaned, her hand tangling in Abby's hair, her body arching helplessly beneath her student's lips. When Abby finally touched her where she ached most, Georgia gasped so sharply it felt like breaking. She tried to speak, to warn, but Abby only whispered, "Let go. I want this." And Georgia did. She let herself unravel, every sigh, every moan torn from her chest, her body shuddering under Abby's eager, trembling devotion. She came undone like the storm outside, wild, relentless, cleansing, and when she collapsed back against the sheets, Abby curled into her arms, kissing her softly, tenderly. For a long time they lay there in silence, listening to the storm ease, their breath sinking. Georgia stroked Abby's hair, her chest rising and falling slowly, her body still humming from the aftershocks of release. "This changes everything," Georgia whispered at last. Abby lifted her head, eyes soft but fierce. "Good. I don't ever want to go back." Georgia kissed her forehead, pulling her closer, finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't destruction, but salvation.